Welcome back, dear friends. It's great to see you here again. I hope you're all doing well wherever you are watching from. Today we dive deep into urgent and controversial questions shaking the geopolitical landscape. Is NATO expanding into the Asia-Pacific? Could Japan and South Korea become NATO's newest members? Is the United States, the world's biggest military spender, ironically the cheapest when it comes to actual NATO defense spending? Is Donald Trump preparing to make Europe foot the bill for the looming U.S. China showdown? Is the old world collapsing as a new global order rises? And most critically, is Donald Trump a self-proclaimed peace messenger or the dark herald of a devastating world war? Fasten your seatbelts because this is going to be one explosive ride. Donald Trump first rose to power promising to stop America's endless wars. He claimed he would be the president of peace, the one to pull the United States back from the brink of foreign conflicts. But looking at his latest actions, nothing could be further from the truth. In Ukraine and Gaza, instead of quelling wars, he's fanned their flames. His administration's aggressive stance has intensified both conflicts. But it doesn't stop there. Trump went even further, authorizing direct military strikes inside Iranian territory. His message to the world is crystal clear. He's not here to end wars. He's preparing for something far larger, a world war. So, what exactly is Trump's grand plan? Well, he wants to transform NATO from a Europe-centered defense alliance into a global military force. And honestly, the most shocking part? Trump's actually pushing to increase NATO members' defense spending to an astonishing 5% of their GDP. Just let that sink in for a moment. He's been repeating this for years, claiming that the United States unfairly shoulders NATO's military costs, defending Europe while, as he puts it, Europeans lie back and relax. Here's the reality. America spends about $900 billion on defense, nearly $1 trillion. Meanwhile, all NATO allies combined spent about $506 billion in 2024. At first glance, it really seems like the United States pays vastly more than Europe. But there's a catch, a big one. European NATO members spend most of their defense budgets strictly on protecting Europe and the North Atlantic region, mainly against Russia. Their spending is tightly focused on defending their immediate geography. In contrast, the United States allocates its defense spending across the entire globe. The Middle East, Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific, and even Antarctica. The U.S. military stretches across 8 major regions. When you strip it down, perhaps only 1/8 of America's massive defense budget actually goes toward Europe's defense. Yet Trump wants Europe to double or even triple its military budgets, forcing them to cut healthcare, education, and social welfare just to meet these new demands. At the recent NATO summit in The Hague, Trump pressured allies into accepting a historic increase in military spending. The new target 5% of national GDP, up from the previous 2% goal. This is unprecedented. Countries like Germany, Italy, and Turkey must now double or even triple their military budgets. Trump, meanwhile, claims the United States doesn't need to increase its spending because it's already above 3.5%. Europeans, terrified of losing U.S. military protection, reluctantly agreed to this massive spending hike. Over the next decade, European nations will gut social programs, slash pensions, and invest billions more in weapons and ammunition. But the question remains, why? Is this really about Russia? Propaganda across Europe is now running at full speed. Political leaders are bombarding citizens with fear, saying things like, if we don't spend this money, Russian tanks will roll into Berlin. They'll take Paris next. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz recently said, defending the Baltics means defending Berlin. Governments across Europe are building bomb shelters, drafting soldiers, and preparing for mass mobilization. Even Denmark has decided to conscript women into military service, a move not seen in decades. But here's the truth that, honestly, nobody wants to talk about. Russia is already vastly outmatched. In 2024, Russia's defense budget was roughly $145 billion, while European NATO nations alone spent more than 3.5 times that amount. European NATO armies already field over 2 million soldiers, without even declaring full mobilization. If Russia ever attacked, Europe could field an additional 1 to 1.5 million troops almost overnight. In terms of tanks, aircraft, and cutting-edge technology, Europe already outpaces Russia. Even factoring in military neglect over the past decades, Europe's defensive strength really dwarfs Russia's. So why the sudden panic? Because the real target isn't Russia. Trump's ultimate focus is China. Everything points to this. Trump is openly trying to improve ties with Russia, even suggesting he'd concede parts of Ukraine to secure Russian neutrality. Behind the scenes, his administration is preparing for a looming U.S. China collision. Step 1. Cripple China's economy by slapping it with trade tariffs and export restrictions, targeting its massive export-driven growth. Step 2. Weaken the growing Russia-China alliance. Since the Ukraine war began, Russia and China have grown remarkably close, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. China now imports cheap Russian energy at massive volumes while using the war to keep Western powers distracted from the Asia-Pacific. In short, China has every incentive to keep the Ukraine conflict simmering. Trump knows this. That's why he's preparing NATO, not for Russia, but for a long-term standoff against China. The United States simply cannot afford to double its defense budget to fight China alone. With $30 trillion in national debt, America's economy would just, implode under such military spending. Trump's solution? Shift the financial burden to Europe, and he's not hiding it. NATO's own leadership is sounding the alarm. In a recent interview with the New York Times, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte laid out a chilling scenario. He warned that if Chinese President Xi Jinping attacks Taiwan, he'll likely call Putin and ask Russia to attack NATO in Europe, to split the alliance's attention and resources. For the first time, NATO's leadership is openly declaring that the real threat isn't just Russia, but China. Rutte described Russia as China's junior partner, painting Beijing as the mastermind pulling Moscow's strings. This narrative marks a seismic shift in NATO's strategy. What once was unthinkable is now openly discussed in Europe's highest circles. NATO's expansion into the Asia-Pacific. France, which long opposed NATO's expansion into Asia, is now changing its tune. President Emmanuel Macron recently warned China that if North Korea intervenes in Ukraine, NATO will intervene in Southeast Asia. Even countries like Japan, South Korea, and possibly the Philippines are now being floated as potential NATO partners, or even full-fledged members. Friends, the writing is on the wall. NATO is evolving, from a North Atlantic defensive pact into a global military alliance. The official justification is still defending against Russia, but behind closed doors, the focus has already shifted to confronting China. The day may soon come when NATO troops are stationed in Tokyo, Seoul, or Manila. Europe's social programs will shrink, defense budgets will balloon, and NATO will become a global police force. And the question we all must ask, are we witnessing preparations for the next World War? Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis eye-opening, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Where do you think NATO is headed next? Until we meet again, stay safe, stay informed, and take care. See you in the next broadcast.